High on the north side of Mount Everest, there is a place where climbers spent 9 years walking past a body. They gave her a name, the Sleeping Beauty. But on the morning of May 24th, 1998, two climbers heading for the summit discovered something impossible about her. She was still alive. "Don't leave me," she begged them. "Please, don't leave me." Just one day earlier, Francys Arsentiev had made history at the top of the world. What happened in between, and why everyone who found her made the same terrible choice, began, of all things, with a love story. But before the love story, you need to understand the place where it ended, because nothing about those final days makes sense without it. The north side of Everest rises out of Tibet, colder and lonelier than the crowded southern route, swept by wind that comes off the high plateau with nothing to slow it down for 1,000 kilometers. There are no forests here, no villages within reach, no green of any kind. There is rock, ice, and sky. Above 8,000 meters, climbers enter what they call the death zone, and the name is not marketing. It is a medical description. The air at that altitude holds roughly a third of the oxygen it does at sea level. The human body cannot adjust to that. It does not adapt, no matter how fit you are, no matter how slowly you climb. It dies, slowly at first, then faster. Digestion shuts down, so food becomes useless weight. The blood thickens. Fluid leaks into the lungs and the brain. Thoughts arrive late and wrong, like messages over a failing connection, and climbers report staring at their own boots for minutes, unable to remember what they were about to do. Sleep stops restoring anything. Every hour spent above 8,000 meters is an hour of active dying, and the only medicine on Earth that works is descent. That is what makes rescue at extreme altitude almost a contradiction in terms. Lower on the mountain, a strong team can carry an injured climber to safety, and helicopters can reach the lower camps. Up in the death zone, no helicopter can hover reliably, and a healthy climber can barely carry himself. A single step can take 4 or 5 breaths. Bending down to lift another person can trigger a collapse in the rescuer. Mountaineers have run the numbers again and again on paper and in practice, and the answer never changes. Dragging an unconscious adult down the exposed rock of the northeast ridge is not a rescue. It is a way of turning one death into 2 or 3, which is why Everest is believed to hold the bodies of some 200 climbers, and why some of them have become permanent features of the landscape, with nicknames passed from one season's climbers to the next. There is a slope on this mountain that climbers grimly call Rainbow Valley, named for the colored downsuits of the dead who lie there. People navigate by them. They step past them in the dark and keep moving, because stopping means joining them. On this mountain, the dead are not carried home. They become part of the route. Francys Arsentiev knew all of this before she ever set foot on the north side. That is exactly what makes her story so hard to look away from. She was born Francys Yarbrough in Honolulu, Hawaii, in 1958, and she found her way to Colorado, to the Rocky Mountains, where she skied, climbed, worked, and raised a son named Paul from an earlier marriage. By every account, she was not the stereotype of the summit-obsessed alpinist. Kathy O'Dowd, a climber who would later play a part in her final hours, remembered her as someone who wasn't an obsessive type of climber, a woman who spoke a lot about her son and home. Friends described warmth, not ambition. But in 1992, Francys married a man for whom the world's highest mountains were simply home ground. Sergei Arsentiev was one of the finest high-altitude climbers Russia had ever produced. He had earned the title of Snow Leopard, the honor reserved for climbers who summit the highest peaks of the former Soviet Union. And he had climbed some of the world's great mountains without bottled oxygen, in the purest and most dangerous style the sport recognizes. Other climbers spoke about Sergei's strength, the way you speak about the weather. It was not an opinion. It was a fact of nature. Together, Fran and Sergei became a rope team in every sense of the word. She became the first American woman to ski down Mount Everest, the highest peak in Europe. Together, they made the first ascent of an unclimbed 5,800-meter peak in Russia, and because it was theirs, they got to name it. They called it Peak Goodwill. And somewhere in those years of shared summits, a very specific prize took shape between them. No American woman had ever stood on top of Everest without supplemental oxygen. Climbing Everest with bottled air was an achievement. Climbing it without was a different sport altogether, practiced by a small circle of elite alpinists, most of them men, and a sobering number of them dead. The record was sitting there, unclaimed, at the top of the world. Fran wanted it. Sergei, the strongest partner she could possibly have, believed she could take it. Her son Paul, 11 years old, felt something else entirely. By the family's later account, the boy was frightened of this expedition in a way he had never been frightened before, and he tried to talk his mother out of going. Her answer became the sentence the whole story now hangs from. "I have to do this." She promised him she would come home. In the spring of 1998, Fran and Sergei traveled to Tibet, trekked up the East Rongbuk Glacier with their gear, and started up the cold side of the highest mountain on Earth. What happened over the next week was not one bad decision. It was a ladder of small ones, each rung a little higher than the last, each one harder to climb back down from. Follow the dates, because the dates are the story. On May 17th, they moved up from Advanced Base Camp to the North Col, the icy saddle at 7,000 meters where the real climbing begins. On May 18th, they pushed on to 7,700 meters. That same day, 21 other climbers reached the summit from the north in clear, calm weather. It was the season's golden window, and Fran and Sergei were one day too low to use it. Nobody controls the weather on Everest. You only control where you are standing when it changes. On May 19th, they reached Camp 6 at 8,203 meters, one of the highest campsites on the planet, a scatter of tents pitched on frozen rubble inside the death zone itself. For climbers using bottled oxygen, Camp 6 is a brief, brutal stopover. You arrive in the afternoon, you melt snow and force down some food, you leave for the summit before midnight, and within a day you are gone, back down where the air can keep you alive. Fran and Sergei had no bottles. From the moment they zipped their tent shut that first night, they were living on borrowed time, and the interest was compounding by the hour. At 1 o'clock in the morning on May 20th, they set out for the summit in darkness. They did not get far. At the first step, one of the rock walls guarding the northeast ridge, their headlamps failed. Climbing that terrain blind, at night, without oxygen, was out of the question. And to their credit, they knew it. They turned around and retreated to the tent. Call it equipment failure. Call it bad luck. Or call it what some climbers would later call it, the mountain's first warning. On May 21st, they tried again. And this time, it was not the gear that failed. It was their bodies. After multiple nights above 8,000 meters with no supplemental oxygen, they managed barely 100 meters of progress before grinding to a halt and turning back. A second failure. A second warning. 2 attempts, 2 retreats, and now yet another night at Camp 6, breathing air that could not sustain them, burning reserves that could not be replaced. The textbook move at that point is written in every mountaineering manual and in the margins of every Everest obituary. Descend, recover, come back another year. The mountain is not going anywhere. But the death zone plays a cruel trick on exactly this decision, because the same oxygen starvation that destroys the body also softens the judgment needed to save it. They had spent years preparing. The record was 2 days of climbing away. They had come too far, suffered too much, to walk away now. In that thin, freezing air, the worst possible decision felt like the only one. They decided to try one more time. Before dawn on May 22nd, Fran and Sergei left Camp 6 for the third attempt. Without bottled oxygen, they moved at the pace the mountain allowed, which is to say, barely at all. Climbers describe movement at that altitude as a kind of walking trance. Step, breathe, breathe again, step. The mind narrows to a tunnel. The hours dissolve and slide past unnoticed, which on Everest is not a poetic detail but a lethal one, because the upper mountain runs on a clock. Every experienced expedition sets a turnaround time, usually early afternoon, and treats it as law, for one simple reason. Reaching the summit is optional. Getting down is not. More climbers die on the descent than on the way up. When the goal is behind them, the adrenaline is gone, and the body's last reserves are already spent. Fran and Sergei climbed through the morning, then through midday, then past every hour a guided team would have accepted. There was no one to stop them. That is the other price of climbing without a big expedition, without Sherpa support, without bottled air. There is no radio call from below ordering you to turn around, no guide with the authority to end the attempt. There is only the two of you, the ridge, and a goal that has been eating the horizon for years. Somewhere on the northeast ridge that afternoon, the last safe version of this story quietly expired, and neither of them noticed it go. And late that day, dangerously late, with the light already going flat and cold, they stood together on the highest point on Earth, 8,848 meters. Francys Arsentiev, the girl from Honolulu, the mother from Colorado, had just become the first American woman to climb Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. Climbers on the mountain that season would remember the bright suit she wore against the snow. No bottled air, no shortcuts. The record was hers, fully and forever. It still is. However, the mountain had already begun collecting its fee. Because look at that summit photograph, the one that was never taken, and read it again with cold eyes. What it actually shows is 2 exhausted climbers standing in the death zone at dusk, with no oxygen, no reserves, and the most dangerous descent in mountaineering between them and their tent. The summit looks like the finish line. It is not. It is the halfway point, and the second half is the half that kills. Darkness caught them on the way down, as it was always going to. Wind, cold, fatigue, and two brains running on a third of the oxygen they were built for. And somewhere in that black, howling descent, the thing happened that no one has ever been able to fully explain. Fran and Sergei, partners on the mountain for years, a married couple who climbed everything as a rope team, became separated. Two headlamps in the darkness became one. Perhaps one of them stopped to rest and the other pressed on to prepare the tent. Perhaps in the dark and the wind, each believed the other was just ahead. No one knows. No one ever will. What is known is this. When gray dawn broke over the ridge on May 23rd, Sergei staggered into Camp 6 alone, wrecked and frostbitten, having barely survived the night. He looked around the tents for his wife. Fran was not there. She was still up on the ridge, somewhere above 8,500 meters, and she had just spent the entire night in the open air of the death zone, without a tent, without a sleeping bag, without oxygen. People do not survive that. Almost. That same morning, a team of Uzbek climbers pushing toward the summit found her. She was crumpled near the fixed ropes below the first step, at roughly 8,600 meters, half conscious, her face and hands destroyed by frostbite, mumbling, unable to stand, and, against every rule of physiology, alive. The Uzbeks did what almost no one at that altitude can afford to do. They stopped. They gave up their summit push, cracked open their own oxygen, and put their masks on her face. Then they began hauling her down the ridge, meter by meter, over rock and ice, at an altitude where dragging 60 kilograms of helpless weight is like performing hard labor while suffocating. They fought for her for as long as their bodies would allow. Then their own strength began to fail, one man at a time, and the arithmetic you already know closed in around them. Carry her further, and they would start dying themselves, one by one, next to her. They had done more than anyone could reasonably ask. It was not enough. They set her down on the mountain, still breathing, and continued their descent, the first people forced to leave Francys Arsentiev behind. And on their way down, in the fading light, they passed a lone figure climbing up into the death zone. It was Sergei. He had found oxygen bottles and medicine, and he was going back up, alone, at the end of his strength, into the dark, for his wife. The Uzbeks exchanged words with him and watched him climb on. They were the last people ever to see Sergei Arsentiev alive. Fran survived a second night in the open. Stop and let that sentence weigh what it weighs. A second full night, above 8,500 meters, exposed on the ridge, without shelter, in temperatures that fell toward 40 below zero, breathing air that cannot keep a resting human alive. Her body should have surrendered hours before. It refused. At dawn on May 24th, two climbers were moving up the fixed ropes toward the summit. Ian Woodall and Kathy O'Dowd had both been on Everest before. They had passed the sleeping and the dead in the dark, and they knew the difference. At the edge of the route, in the pale morning light, they saw a figure clipped to the fixed rope, a bright suit, dusted with snow, a face bleached white by frost, another of the mountain's permanent residents, they thought. Then the body moved. What they had taken for a corpse was a woman, and the woman was speaking. Her exact words have been reported in slightly different ways over the years, but those who were there recall three phrases, repeated over and over, in a voice ruined by 2 nights of freezing air. Don't leave me. Why are you doing this to me? I'm an American. She could not say her own name. She did not seem to know where she was. Her eyes were open but could no longer find faces. But she could beg. And she begged strangers she would never see clearly, on a ledge of the northeast ridge, a few hundred meters below the place where, 2 days earlier, she had made history. Woodall and O'Dowd abandoned their summit attempt on the spot. Years of planning and training, the entire purpose of their expedition, the summit standing right there in perfect view, all of it discarded in a single decision that, by every account, neither of them stopped to debate. For more than an hour, they fought for her life. They tried to sit her up. They tried to lift her, to move her even a few meters down the ridge, and discovered what the Uzbeks had discovered the day before, what the cold arithmetic of the death zone dictates to everyone equally. She was a full-grown adult, completely unable to help herself, lying on steep, exposed ground at 8,600 meters, and they were two human beings whose own bodies were dying above 8,000 meters, minute by minute, as they worked. And then there was the detail that made all of it unbearable. Near her, in the snow, lay an ice axe and a neat coil of rope, Sergei's. He had made it back to her, or agonizingly close to her, sometime in that final night, and now he was nowhere. The wind was rising off the ridge. Their own oxygen was draining away with every minute they stayed. Kathy O'Dowd would later write about that morning under a title that says everything the story needs to say: "Don't leave me here to die." She described reaching the limit, not of willingness, but of the possible. The precise moment a rescuer understands that staying longer changes nothing except the final number of the dead. Understand what that limit actually looks like, because it is not a dramatic moment. It is a horribly quiet one. It is two people crouched over a third, doing sums. How many hours of daylight? How many liters of oxygen? How many meters of steep, broken rock between this ledge and the highest camp? And how many of those meters can be covered while carrying a dying woman who cannot hold on, cannot help, cannot even keep her head upright? However the numbers were arranged, they always produced the same answer. The mountain does not negotiate. It had already taken her hands, her face, her mind, and her husband, and it was now, patiently, in no hurry at all, reaching for anyone who stayed beside her. There was nothing left to try. They tucked what warmth they could around her. And then Ian Woodall and Kathy O'Dowd did the thing that would follow them both for the rest of their lives. They turned around, not upward, toward the summit they had given up. Downward, defeated, leaving a living, speaking woman clipped to the fixed rope behind them, her voice fading into the wind at their backs. Sometime that day, the 24th of May, 1998, Francys Arsentiev stopped breathing. She died alone, attached to the safety line that runs the entire length of the route, the rope that every climber on the north side holds on their way to the top of the world. And for the next 9 years, no one touched her. Sergei never came down. For a full year, his fate was simply a blank space in the story, a missing man beside a visible woman. Then, in 1999, an American expedition came to the North Face, searching for the remains of George Mallory, the climber lost in 1924. In the course of that search, climber Jake Norton found a body lower on the mountain face, and it was identified as Sergei Arsentiev. The position of the body told a quiet, devastating story. The snow leopard, one of the strongest high-altitude climbers of his generation, had fallen to his death, almost certainly during that final solitary climb, carrying oxygen and medicine up through the darkness toward his wife. He had offered the mountain a target it is rarely given: a man alone, exhausted beyond measure, climbing at night into the death zone for love. The mountain took him, and far away, in another world where air is thick and warm, an 11-year-old boy named Paul absorbed the news that no child is built to carry. In the space of roughly 2 days, he had lost his mother to the altitude and Sergei to the fall. She had told him, "I have to do this." She had promised him she would come home. The mountain kept them both. What the mountain also kept was the picture. Fran's body lay just beside the main route on the north side, in plain view, her bright suit fading a little more with every season, passed by every single climber heading for the summit, year after year after year. They could not bury her. They could not move her. So climbers did what people always do with the things they cannot fix. They gave her a name: the Sleeping Beauty of Everest. For 9 years, she was a landmark, a warning, and a wound that never closed, least of all for the two people who had heard her voice. Climbers who passed her in those years described the strange, guilty intimacy of it. You are hours from the summit of your life, moving through the dark on the last of your strength, and there she is, exactly where she was left. A woman who also had a summit, also had a family, also had a promise to keep. Some looked away, some stopped, briefly, and said something to her. All of them kept climbing. That is not a judgment of them. It is simply what the mountain makes of everyone, sooner or later. Ian Woodall could not leave it alone. In 2007, he returned to Everest, and this time he was not going to the summit. He was going to her. He called the expedition the Tau of Everest, and he climbed back into the death zone, back to the ledge he had never stopped seeing, to keep a promise 9 years old. There, at 8,600 meters, he held a brief ceremony for a woman he had known for only 1 terrible hour, wrapped Francys Arsentiev in an American flag, and lowered her body over the edge of the face, away from the route, out of sight of the living, forever. So what is the verdict? Was Francys Arsentiev failed twice by climbers who weighed her life against their own and stepped past? Or was she beyond saving from the moment the second night fell, in a place where carrying her would only have added new names to the count? The people who were actually there answered with everything they had, and everything they had was not enough. The rest of us were not there. All that remains is the final image. A man kneeling in the snow beside the woman he could not save, 9 years too late and exactly on time, letting the flag and the mountain take her. It was the only privacy Everest ever gave her.